I'm Ashley, 28, and my grandfather Frederick was my world. When he died last month, a piece of my heart went with him. Walking into his funeral, I noticed my Aunt Barbara and my cousins shooting icy glares my way. Something felt off. Before he passed, Grandpa squeezed my hand and whispered something strange. The truth will come when they think they've won. I had no idea what awaited me after the service. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Family inheritance stories reveal who people truly are when money enters the picture. My relationship with Grandpa Frederick was something special, something I cherished deeply even as a child. While other kids dreaded visiting their grandparents, I counted down the days until our weekend visits to his sprawling Victorian home on Maple Street. The house itself was magical to me, 3 stories of history with hidden nooks, creaky floorboards that told stories, and windows that filtered sunlight into rainbow patterns across the hardwood floors. But the real magic happened in his garage workshop. That's where Grandpa Frederick taught me woodworking, his calloused hands guiding mine as we transformed rough lumber into beautiful creations. "Take your time, Ashley," he'd say in his gentle voice. "The wood will tell you what it wants to be if you listen carefully enough." I'd watch in awe as his skilled hands worked the material, creating everything from delicate jewelry boxes to rocking chairs that would last generations. My parents, Thomas and Catherine, loved me dearly but were always caught up in their demanding careers. Mom was a corporate attorney and Dad ran his own accounting firm. Their idea of quality time often involved expensive trips where they'd still be answering emails. But Grandpa Frederick gave me his full, undivided attention. No phones, no distractions, just us, creating together. Our birthday traditions were exclusively ours. While my parents typically gave me gift cards or the latest gadgets, Grandpa Frederick would take me on adventure days. On my 10th birthday, he surprised me with a hot air balloon ride at sunrise. When I turned 16, we spent the day touring local art galleries, followed by a picnic where he presented me with a handmade wooden case filled with professional brushes. "Your talent deserves proper tools," he told me that day, his blue eyes twinkling with pride as I reverently touched each brush. That was the day I realized someone truly believed in my artistic dreams. When I expressed interest in art, my parents exchanged worried glances and suggested more practical pursuits. But Grandpa Frederick? He bought me my first set of professional art supplies when I was only 12. The brushes, paints, and canvases were far better quality than anything I'd used before. And I remember crying when I opened the package. "An artist needs the right tools to express what's in their soul," he said, patting my shoulder. "And you, my dear, have the soul of a true artist." He didn't just provide materials, he nurtured my creative spirit. Once a month, he'd take me to museums and galleries across the state. We'd spend hours discussing color theory, composition, and the emotional impact of different artistic styles. While other adults dismissed my artistic ambitions, Grandpa taught me to believe in myself despite their criticism. "People will always tell you what you can't do," he said during one of our gallery visits. "Your job is to show them what you can do." His support continued through my college years. When I announced I wanted to major in fine arts, my parents argued for a business degree instead. "You can always paint on weekends," my father said dismissively. But Grandpa Frederick intervened, offering to help fund my education. "Life is too short to spend it chasing someone else's dream," he told my parents firmly. "Ashley has a gift. Let her develop it." Throughout college, he remained my strongest supporter. Despite his notorious dislike of technology, he still used a flip phone until the end. He made weekly calls to check on me. The conversations always lasted at least an hour, covering everything from my latest projects to his gardening adventures. Better yet were his handwritten letters, arriving like clockwork every 2 weeks. Written in his distinctive cursive, they contained life advice, funny anecdotes about neighbors, and occasionally old family photographs with stories written on the back. I saved every single one in a special box, treasuring his wisdom. "Remember," one letter read, "success isn't measured by the money you make, but by the joy you create. Make something beautiful today, even if it's just a kind word to a stranger." As his health began declining 3 years ago, I made the decision to move closer to him. I found a small apartment just 15 minutes from his home and took a job teaching art at a local community center. My parents thought I was sacrificing my career, but to me, nothing was more important than spending time with the man who had shaped my life so profoundly. In those final years, our roles gradually reversed. I began driving him to doctor appointments, helping with grocery shopping, and eventually assisting with medication management. We still created art together, though his hands weren't as steady as they once were. Our conversations during this time turned philosophical. He spoke often about his life's regrets and triumphs, about the importance of living with integrity. Sometimes he made cryptic comments about setting things right and showing people their true reflections, but when I asked what he meant, he'd just smile mysteriously and change the subject. "Everything in its proper time, Ashley," he'd say. "Some truths need the right moment to be revealed." I had no idea then how prophetic those words would prove to be. To understand what happened at the funeral, you need to know about my family, particularly my Aunt Barbara, my grandfather's only daughter. Where Grandpa Frederick was generous and kind, Aunt Barbara was calculating and materialistic. Everything in her life had a price tag attached, including relationships. Her husband, Uncle Richard, was a meek man who rarely spoke against her wishes, seemingly content to live in her shadow. Their children, my cousins Melissa and Trevor, grew up with every advantage money could buy. Designer clothes, luxury cars on their 16th birthdays, and expensive colleges they barely attended before dropping out. Neither had worked a real job in their lives, existing on allowances from their parents and occasional loans from Grandpa that everyone knew would never be repaid. My own parents, Thomas and Catherine, had distanced themselves from family affairs years ago. After numerous arguments with Aunt Barbara over business decisions, they decided maintaining peace meant limited contact. They attended mandatory holiday gatherings and sent appropriate gifts for birthdays, but emotionally, they'd checked out of the family dynamics. The root of many conflicts was the family business, Morgan Furniture Manufacturing, founded by my great-grandfather. Grandpa Frederick had expanded it significantly during his tenure, turning a small local workshop into a regional success known for quality craftsmanship. When he semi-retired 15 years ago, he appointed a board of directors rather than naming a single successor, which infuriated Aunt Barbara, who believed she should automatically take control. Blood means nothing if it lacks confidence, Grandpa told her during one particularly heated argument I overheard as a teenager. The company deserves leadership that respects its legacy and workers. Barbara never forgave him for this perceived slight. Instead, she began a subtle campaign to control other aspects of his life. It started with small suggestions about his health, his home, his daily routine. As he aged, her helpful advice became more insistent, eventually morphing into demands disguised as concern. "Dad, you really shouldn't be living alone in that big house," she'd say whenever I was within earshot. "Richard, and I think you should consider moving into our guest house. We can keep a better eye on you there." What she really meant was she could keep him isolated from other family members, particularly me. The tension between us was palpable from the moment I moved back to town to help care for him. Barbara viewed me as competition for Grandpa's attention and, I suspected, his inheritance. The conflicts escalated when I discovered she had scheduled meetings with Grandpa's attorney without his knowledge. When confronted, she claimed she was just helping organize his affairs. But Grandpa was furious when I told him. "My mind is still sharp, even if my body isn't," he thundered after Barbara left that day. "My affairs are my business, not hers to manage." After that incident, Barbara began spreading rumors about my intentions. According to her whispers, I had moved back solely to influence Grandpa's will. She told extended family members that I was manipulating a vulnerable old man and probably stealing from him too. These accusations hurt deeply, especially when relatives who had known me my entire life began treating me differently at family gatherings. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Sympathetic glances were thrown Barbara's way when I sat with Grandpa. Eventually, I received fewer invitations to family events, with the excuse that it might be too difficult for Frederick to attend. In reality, Barbara was systematically isolating Grandpa from everyone except those she could control. She hired a housekeeper who reported to her and attempted to schedule his doctor appointments at times she knew I couldn't drive him. When I confronted her, she would put on an innocent act. "I'm just trying to help, Ashley. Some of us have been here all along, not just showing up when inheritance matters." The last major confrontation happened 3 months before Grandpa died. I arrived at his house to find Barbara and a man she introduced as Dad's new financial advisor. They had paperwork spread across the dining table, and Grandpa looked confused and agitated. When I asked what was happening, Barbara smoothly explained they were updating some investments. I asked to speak to Grandpa alone, and once Barbara reluctantly left the room, he confessed he didn't understand what he was being asked to sign. When I reviewed the documents, I discovered they would have given Barbara co-signing authority on all his accounts. "She said it would make things easier if I got sick," he explained, looking embarrassed. But something didn't feel right. I suggested he consult with his longtime attorney before signing anything, which led to another explosive argument with Barbara, who accused me of interfering. She stormed out, taking the papers with her and leaving a cloud of tension behind. After that day, I made a conscious decision to focus solely on Grandpa's comfort and happiness rather than engaging in family politics. If Barbara wanted to fight, she would have to do it without my participation. My energy would be better spent making Grandpa's final months peaceful and joyful. Little did I know that Grandpa Frederick had been observing everything more carefully than any of us realized and making plans of his own. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. Grandpa had been admitted to the hospital after a serious fall. By the time I arrived, he was settled in a private room, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen him against the stark white hospital sheets. Despite the doctor's grim prognosis, Grandpa remained lucid and determined over the next 2 weeks. I spent every possible moment at the hospital, rearranging my teaching schedule to be there during the day and often sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair at night. During those days, we fell into a gentle routine. In the mornings, I'd read to him from his favorite books, Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, Steinbeck's East of Eden, and poetry by Robert Frost. His eyes would close as he listened, a slight smile playing on his lips as the familiar words washed over him. "Words outlive us all," he commented once. "Choose yours carefully, Ashley." In the afternoons, I'd share updates about my art. I had recently held my first small exhibition at the community center, and I brought photographs of the display and told him about people's reactions to my work. Though he couldn't attend in person, his pride was evident in the way he studied each image, asking detailed questions about my techniques and inspiration. "You found your voice," he said, tapping one particular landscape image. "This one speaks truth." The evenings were quieter. Sometimes we'd watch old movies on the small hospital TV, but more often, we'd just sit together in comfortable silence. I'd sketch while he dozed, or we'd simply hold hands, communicating without words in the way that close souls can. Barbara visited sporadically, always arriving with an air of importance and leaving quickly after checking with the doctors. She brought expensive flowers that Grandpa couldn't smell and specialty foods he couldn't eat. Her children came once, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed for 10 minutes before claiming they had other commitments. It was during the second week of his hospital stay that everything changed. The doctors had adjusted his medication, and he seemed suddenly more alert, more purposeful. On a Thursday afternoon, as Barbara was preparing to leave after one of her brief visits, Grandpa asked to speak with me privately. "Barbara, would you mind giving Ashley and me a moment alone?" he asked, his voice surprisingly strong. My aunt's face tightened with displeasure. "Dad, I was going to discuss the house arrangements with you. The doctor mentioned you might need specialized care and—" "Later," he interrupted firmly. "I need to speak with Ashley now. Alone, please." After Barbara reluctantly departed, shooting me a suspicious glance, Grandpa motioned for me to come closer. He reached for my hand, his grip still surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. "Ashley, listen carefully," he began, his voice low but clear. "There are papers in the right hands. When the time comes, you must be strong. Things may not appear as they should at first." Confused, I leaned closer. "What do you mean, Grandpa? What papers?" He shook his head slightly. "Just remember that appearances can deceive. I've arranged for the truth to emerge when it needs to." From beneath his pillow, he withdrew a small object, his antique pocket watch. It had belonged to his father and grandfather before him. A family heirloom with a gold case engraved with intricate scrollwork. He pressed it into my palm, curling my fingers around it. "Keep this safe," he instructed. "Don't open it until after the funeral. It contains something important." "But Grandpa, promise me," he insisted, his blue eyes intense. "And promise you'll trust the process, no matter what happens. Can you do that for me?" Though confused, I nodded. "I promise." His expression softened then, and he reached up to touch my cheek. "You've always made me proud, Ashley. From the moment you were born, you had a spark, a genuine goodness that can't be taught. You're the true legacy I leave behind, not money or property or furniture." Tears filled my eyes as I held his hand against my face. "I learned it from you." "Perhaps," he smiled. "But you made it your own. Now listen, no matter what happens after I'm gone, remember who you are. Remember what matters. The truth has a way of surfacing, like cream rising to the top." "I don't understand," I admitted, wiping away tears. "You will," he assured me. "Just promise me one more thing. Promise you'll carry on with your art, with creating beauty in this often ugly world. That's your gift to give." "I promise," I whispered, though at that moment I couldn't imagine creating anything again if he wasn't there to see it. We sat together in silence after that, the unspoken affection between us filling the room more completely than words ever could. Later that evening, he asked for his favorite Frost poem again, "The Road Not Taken," and I read it aloud as twilight settled outside the window. When I reached the final lines about taking the road less traveled, he smiled peacefully and closed his eyes. By morning, he was gone, slipping away quietly in his sleep while I dozed in the chair beside him. The grief hit me like a physical blow. For the first time in my life, I couldn't pick up a paintbrush. My sketchbooks remained untouched, my canvases blank. The very thought of creating art without Grandpa's encouraging presence felt impossible. Instead, I found myself wandering through memories, sitting for hours in his workshop, touching the tools we had used together, breathing in the lingering scent of sawdust and varnish. I carried his pocket watch with me constantly, though I honored his request not to open it. Whatever was inside, whatever message he had left me, would wait until after we said our final goodbyes. Despite my curiosity, there was comfort in having this last mystery to solve. This final connection to the man who had shaped so much of who I was. As the funeral approached, I found myself increasingly isolated from the family decision-making process. Barbara took charge of all arrangements, consulting me only when absolutely necessary. But I held tight to Grandpa's final words, trusting that somehow, in some way I couldn't yet understand, he had prepared for whatever was coming next. The funeral service was held at First Presbyterian Church, where Grandpa had served as a deacon for over 40 years. The sanctuary overflowed with people whose lives he had touched, former employees, neighbors, friends from every chapter of his life. The abundance of flowers nearly overwhelmed the altar, their sweet fragrance filling the air. I sat in the front pew, my parents beside me, acutely aware of Barbara and her family directly across the aisle. While my eyes were red-rimmed from days of grieving, I couldn't help but notice the composed, almost impatient expressions on my cousins' faces. Trevor checked his watch repeatedly, while Melissa seemed more concerned with who might notice her designer black dress than with the service itself. When the minister invited family members to share memories, Barbara rose first. Her eulogy was polished and appropriate, focusing on Grandpa's business accomplishments and community standing. She spoke of his traditional values and financial wisdom, but barely touched on who he was as a person, his humor, his kindness, his passion for woodworking. When my turn came, I spoke from my heart about the man behind the accomplishments. I shared stories of his patience teaching neighborhood children to build birdhouses, his habit of anonymously paying for strangers' groceries, and how he visited his workers in the hospital when they were ill. I described his philosophy that beautiful things should be created with care and integrity, whether they were furniture pieces or relationships. My grandfather believed that how we treat others reveals who we truly are, I concluded, my voice breaking slightly. He measured wealth not by money, but by the number of lives he touched with kindness. That's the legacy I'll always carry with me. From my peripheral vision, I could see Barbara's obvious annoyance at my central role in the ceremony. Her lips tightened into a thin line, and she whispered something to Richard that made him frown in my direction. Throughout the rest of the service, I felt the weight of disapproving stares from that side of the church. After the graveside service, family members and close friends were instructed to proceed directly to the offices of Daniels and Associates for the reading of the will. Barbara made a point of announcing this loudly, adding, "Only those specifically mentioned in the will need to attend," while looking pointedly at me. The attorney's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building with views of the city park Grandpa had helped fund years ago. The conference room was modern and sterile, all glass, chrome, and black leather, nothing like the warm wooden spaces my grandfather had preferred. We arranged ourselves around the massive table, an uncomfortable silence filling the room as Marcus Daniels, Grandpa's attorney for over 30 years, organized his documents. I clutched my small purse containing the pocket watch, drawing comfort from its presence. My parents sat beside me, my mother occasionally squeezing my hand supportively. Across the table, Barbara and Richard sat straight-backed and attentive, while Trevor and Melissa scrolled through their phones until Barbara hissed at them to show respect. Other attendees included Grandpa's younger brother George, his longtime assistant from the furniture company Patricia, and surprisingly, Pastor Jim from the church. Their presence seemed to irritate Barbara, who clearly wanted this to be a strictly immediate family affair. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began formally. "As Frederick Morgan's attorney and friend for many years, I've been entrusted with executing his last will and testament. Before I begin, I want to express my personal condolences to the family. Frederick was an exceptional man, and his loss will be felt deeply." He opened a leather portfolio and adjusted his reading glasses. "This will was signed and notarized 4 months ago, with all proper witnesses. I'll summarize the main provisions before providing copies to relevant parties." The room grew tense as Marcus cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Frederick William Morgan, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." As the legal language continued, I found my mind drifting to memories of Grandpa teaching me to sand wood with the grain, his patient voice explaining that rushing only created more work later. The attorney's voice suddenly brought me back to attention. "To my daughter, Barbara Morgan Ellis, I leave my entire estate, including but not limited to the family residence at 247 Maple Street. All business interests in Morgan Furniture Manufacturing, all financial accounts, investments, and personal property contained within the residence. She shall serve as executor of the estate with full authority to distribute or maintain these assets as she sees fit." A small gasp escaped my lips as Barbara's expression transformed into barely contained triumph. Marcus continued reading various legal provisions, but I barely heard them until he reached a paragraph that made my heart stop. "Regarding my granddaughter, Ashley Morgan, I wish to state explicitly that she shall receive no portion of my estate. While I have valued our relationship, I have provided sufficiently for her during my lifetime through educational support and other gifts. She is a capable young woman who must now make her own way in the world without further financial assistance from my estate." The words hit like physical blows. Not just the disinheritance, but the cold, formal tone so unlike the loving grandfather I knew. Tears blurred my vision as confusion and hurt washed over me. This couldn't be right. This couldn't be what he wanted. Barbara's smug smile across the table made the moment even more painful. My mother gripped my hand tightly while my father looked stunned. Marcus, there must be some mistake, my father began. Frederick always said. The document is legally binding, Thomas, Marcus interrupted, his expression unreadable. Unless someone has grounds to contest the will. These are Frederick's explicit wishes. As quiet murmurs filled the room, my phone suddenly buzzed in my purse. Pulling it out to silence it, I was startled to see a calendar alert on the screen. Remember the watch, it's time. The reminder had been set months ago, and not by me. With trembling hands, I reached into my purse and withdrew the antique pocket watch. Following some instinct, I clicked open the case, something I'd been specifically instructed not to do until after the funeral. Inside, where the watch face should have been, was a small brass key taped to the interior with a tiny note in Grandpa's handwriting, "Truth comes in its own time." I must have gasped audibly because the room fell silent. All eyes turning toward me. Marcus Daniels stared at the key in my hand, his professional composure cracking for the first time. "Is that," he began, then stopped, standing abruptly. "May I see that key, Ashley?" The atmosphere in the conference room shifted as Marcus examined the small brass key I'd found inside Grandpa's pocket watch. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, and he quickly excused himself, returning moments later with a polished wooden box I'd never seen before. "I believe we may have additional documents to review," he announced, placing the box on the table. Frederick left specific instructions that this box should only be opened if the key was presented at the will reading. Barbara rose halfway from her seat. "What is this, Marcus?" "The will was just read. Everything is settled." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Not everything, Barbara. Your father was very specific about this contingency." He inserted the small key into the box's ornate lock. It turned with a solid click, and he carefully lifted the lid to reveal a sealed envelope and what appeared to be a USB drive. "This," Marcus said, holding up the envelope, "is a legally executed codicil to Frederick's will, dated just 2 weeks before his passing, when he was hospitalized, but still of sound mind. I witnessed it myself, along with 2 nurses from the hospital who can testify to his mental clarity if necessary." Barbara's face flushed dark red. "This is ridiculous. Dad was heavily medicated in the hospital. Whatever this is, it can't possibly be valid." "Actually," Marcus countered, "your father requested his medication be temporarily reduced for this specific purpose, with his doctor's approval. We have the medical records confirming his competency at the time of signing. The doctor is prepared to testify if needed." He broke the seal on the envelope and withdrew several pages of legal documents. The room fell deathly quiet as he began to read. "I, Frederick William Morgan, hereby amend my previous will with this codicil, to be revealed only after the initial will reading has concluded. My reasons for this unusual approach will become clear. Throughout my life, I have valued honesty, integrity, and genuine care for others above material wealth. As I approach the end of my life, I have become increasingly concerned about the influence of greed and entitlement within my family. This codicil represents my attempt to reveal true character and ensure my legacy benefits those who share my values. The will that was just read to you is a test, a mirror held up to reflect the true nature of those who claim to love me." How individuals reacted to that will, their words, their facial expressions, their treatment of others following its reading reveals more about their character than any words could express. Marcus paused, glancing around the room at the shocked faces before continuing. "For the past year, I have been documenting instances of manipulation, specifically attempts to isolate me from family members, pressure me into changing my will, and make financial decisions without my full consent. With the assistance of trusted friends, medical professionals, and my attorney Marcus Daniels, I have compiled substantial evidence of these behaviors." Barbara stood up abruptly. "This is slander. Marcus, you can't possibly allow this character assassination to continue." Marcus remained calm. "Please be seated, Barbara. There's more, and interrupting won't change what's written here." Once Barbara reluctantly sat down, Marcus continued reading the codicil. The actual distribution of my estate shall be as follows. To my daughter Barbara, I leave a monthly allowance of $2,000 to be managed by the estate trustee. This allowance is contingent upon her participation in family counseling and demonstrable efforts to repair the relationships she has damaged through her actions. The evidence package accompanying this codicil details my reasons for this decision. To my grandchildren Melissa and Trevor Ellis, I leave trust funds of $100,000 each, accessible only for educational purposes or the establishment of businesses that demonstrate social responsibility. These funds will be managed by the trustee until they have shown genuine effort in pursuing meaningful work or education. To my son-in-law Richard, I leave my collection of first edition books, with the hope that he will find the courage within their pages to stand up for what is right, even when difficult. To my son Thomas and daughter-in-law Catherine, I leave controlling interest in Morgan Furniture Manufacturing, with the condition that they maintain the company's commitment to quality craftsmanship, fair labor practices, and community involvement. The business has always been about people, not just profits. To my granddaughter Ashley, I leave my residence at 247 Maple Street, along with all its contents, my personal workshop and tools, and the sum of $500,000 to establish the Frederick Morgan Foundation for Arts Education. Ashley has demonstrated not only artistic talent, but the compassion and integrity I value above all else. I trust her to use these resources to continue creating beauty in the world. A stunned silence filled the room. Barbara's face had drained of all color, while my parents looked at each other in disbelief. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, overwhelmed by the complexity of what Grandpa had orchestrated. Marcus then lifted the USB drive. Frederick also prepared extensive documentation supporting this codicil, which I am obligated to share with all parties present. He connected the drive to a laptop, and the conference room screen illuminated with a video of my grandfather, recorded in the hospital but looking remarkably alert and determined. If you're watching this, Grandpa's recorded voice filled the room, then Ashley found the key. And Marcus has read my true wishes. I'm sorry for the deception, but it was necessary to reveal the truth that people often hide behind polite facades. The video continued as Grandpa explained his reasoning and the evidence he had gathered. There were recordings of conversations where Barbara could be heard pressuring him to change his will, financial records showing unauthorized transfers from his accounts to hers, and testimonials from medical staff about her attempts to limit his visitors, particularly me. Most devastating was a recorded conversation between Barbara and her children, discussing how they would sell the family home and company immediately after his death, dismissing his lifetime of work as old-fashioned sentimentality that needed to be converted to actual value. As the evidence mounted, Barbara's demeanor changed from outrage to defensive panic. He was manipulating all of us, she finally exploded. This whole thing is a setup. I've been nothing but devoted to this family, and this is how I'm repaid? I'll contest this in court. I wouldn't advise that, Barbara, Marcus interrupted gently. The evidence is quite comprehensive, including documentation of your attempt to have your father declared incompetent so you could take control of his finances, an effort that failed when independent psychological evaluation found him perfectly capable of managing his affairs. Pastor Jim, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Barbara, I was there for many of these conversations. Frederick gave you numerous opportunities to change course, to demonstrate the values he tried to instill in all of you. This wasn't done out of malice, but out of love and a desire for truth. The final portion of Grandpa's video message played, his weathered face filling the screen. I hope this revelation leads not to more division but to reflection and eventually healing. Money and possessions are merely tools. What matters is how we use them and how we treat one another. Barbara, Melissa, Trevor, I love you, but love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior. I hope this serves as the wake-up call you need. To Ashley and the others who have demonstrated integrity, thank you for being the people I always hoped my family would be. As the video ended, the room remained in stunned silence. I clutched the pocket watch, understanding now why he had been so insistent that I wait until after the funeral to open it. The key wasn't just to a box, it was to the truth he had carefully documented when he realized what was happening around him. Barbara gathered her purse and stood abruptly. "This isn't over," she hissed, storming toward the door with Richard trailing behind her. Melissa and Trevor followed, neither making eye contact with anyone else in the room. As they left, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. Grandpa had seen everything more clearly than any of us realized, and in his final act, he had ensured that truth would prevail, but at what cost to the family? Marcus approached me after they'd gone, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather was very proud of you, Ashley. He wanted me to tell you that this wasn't just about money or property, it was about preserving the values he stood for. He trusted you to understand that." I nodded, unable to speak through the knot in my throat. Whatever came next would be complicated, but Grandpa had prepared for that too. As always, he had been 3 steps ahead of everyone else, quietly observing and planning while others underestimated him. The days following the revelation of Grandpa's secret codicil were a whirlwind of emotions and legal maneuvers. As I had feared, Barbara immediately filed to contest the codicil, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity, standard grounds for challenging a will. Her attorney, a sharply dressed woman with a reputation for aggressive tactics, served papers to both Marcus and me within 48 hours of the reading. "This is completely expected," Marcus assured me during our first strategy meeting. Frederick anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. The documentation he gathered is extraordinarily thorough. True to Marcus's prediction, the family quickly divided into factions. My parents, initially shocked by the entire situation, rallied to support me after reviewing the evidence Grandpa had compiled. Uncle George, who had always maintained a cordial but distant relationship with Barbara, offered his unequivocal support as well. Fred always saw things clearly, he told me over coffee at my apartment. If this is what he decided, then he had damn good reasons. Others weren't so steadfast. Extended family members found themselves caught in an uncomfortable position, pressured by Barbara to take sides while simultaneously disturbed by the evidence against her. Holiday gatherings were canceled, group text messages went unanswered, and the once large family portrait on my grandmother's piano seemed to shrink with each passing day as people distanced themselves from the conflict. The most difficult part wasn't the legal battle, but the emotional one. Despite everything, these were still family members I had known my entire life. Each aggressive legal filing, each refused phone call, each cold shoulder at a chance community encounter was a fresh wound. I found myself lying awake at night, wondering if Grandpa had truly anticipated the depth of pain his plan would cause. 3 weeks after the will reading, I finally gathered the courage to visit the Victorian house I had inherited but hadn't yet entered. Standing on the wide front porch where Grandpa and I had spent countless evenings watching fireflies in the summer, I felt both like a trespasser and the rightful guardian of his legacy. The house smelled exactly like him, a comforting blend of pipe tobacco, though he'd quit smoking years ago, lemon furniture polish, and the subtle scent of cedar that seemed embedded in the very walls. Walking through the rooms was like moving through a museum of memories, the dining table where he'd taught me to play chess, the reading nook where he'd introduced me to Mark Twain and Jack London, the sunroom where he'd set up an easel so I could paint alongside him working on furniture designs. In his study, I found the first letter. It was propped against his old typewriter, my name written on the envelope in his distinctive handwriting. Inside was a note dated 6 months before his death. "Ashley, it began, if you're reading this, then things have unfolded as I suspected they might. First, know that I'm sorry for any pain this situation has caused you. The path of truth is rarely smooth, but it's always necessary. Look in the hollowed-out copy of Walden on the 3rd shelf. You'll find the next piece of the puzzle there." Following his instructions, I found another letter inside the hollowed book, which directed me to another location, and then another. It became clear that Grandpa had created an elaborate scavenger hunt throughout the house, each letter containing not only directions to the next, but also pieces of his wisdom, explanations for his decisions, and memories he wanted to share. The desk drawer in the guest room, the one that sticks unless you jiggle it just so, contains photographs you've never seen. They tell a story I should have shared long ago. The photographs revealed Barbara's troubling pattern of behavior stretching back decades, including images of torn-up earlier versions of wills, confrontations at family events I was too young to remember, and what appeared to be Barbara removing items from the house when Grandpa was hospitalized years earlier. Another letter addressed the business. The company was never meant to be a cash cow to be milked dry and discarded. It represents 3 generations of relationships, innovation, and commitment to quality. Your father understood this once, before he let disappointment drive him away. I hope he remembers now. The most difficult letter was hidden inside the workshop, taped beneath his favorite workbench. I know you're questioning whether this elaborate plan was worth the family strife it has caused. The answer is that truth, however painful, is always preferable to comfortable lies. A family built on deception is no family at all, it's a conspiracy. I chose truth, even knowing the cost, because only truth offers the possibility of genuine healing. As weeks turned into months, the legal proceedings continued. Barbara's attorney requested extensive medical records, attempting to prove Grandpa had been mentally compromised. Our side submitted the substantial evidence Grandpa had compiled, along with expert testimony from his doctors confirming his mental clarity until the very end. The emotional toll was substantial. I lost weight, struggled to sleep, and found myself unable to focus on my art. The community center director kindly granted me a leave of absence from teaching, understanding that I couldn't effectively nurture others' creativity while my own was smothered by stress. The lowest point came 4 months after Grandpa's death, when I encountered Melissa at the local grocery store. Instead of avoiding me as the family had been doing, she approached directly, her expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why couldn't you just let it go?" she demanded, her voice loud enough to draw attention from other shoppers. "We were family. And now everything's destroyed because you and Grandpa had to prove a point." "That wasn't what this was about," I replied quietly, trying to maintain composure. "He wanted the truth to be known." "The truth?" she scoffed. "The truth is you manipulated a sick old man to turn him against his own daughter. You poisoned him against all of us." The accusation stung all the more because it was exactly what I had feared others might think. "Melissa, you know that's not what happened. You've seen the evidence." "Evidence he could only have gathered with your help," she countered. "Mom's right, you orchestrated this whole thing for the money." I abandoned my shopping cart and left the store, sitting in my car and crying for nearly an hour afterward. If this was victory, it felt hollow and painful. The turning point came unexpectedly, 6 months after Grandpa's death. Just days before the scheduled court date to hear Barbara's contest of the will, Marcus called with surprising news. "Barbara's withdrawing her challenge," he said, his voice conveying his own astonishment. "Her attorney contacted me this morning. They're accepting the codicil as valid." "Why?" I asked, suspicious of any sudden capitulation. "What changed?" "Apparently, Richard finally found his backbone," Marcus explained. "He's been going through the evidence on his own, and yesterday he told Barbara he wouldn't support her in court. In fact, he was prepared to testify about additional incidents Frederick didn't even know about." Faced with her husband's defection, Barbara realized she couldn't win. The news should have felt like triumph, but instead, it brought a wave of exhaustion, followed by something unexpected relief that the fighting might finally end. When Marcus asked if I wanted to pursue any counterclaims for legal fees or emotional distress, I declined. Grandpa wanted truth, not vengeance, I told him. If they're ready to accept reality, that's enough. In the aftermath of Barbara's withdrawal, small, tentative steps toward reconciliation began. Richard reached out first, asking if he could visit the house to see the book collection he'd inherited. During that awkward but civil meeting, he apologized for his years of passive complicity. I should have stood up to her long ago, he admitted, running his fingers along the spines of Grandpa's leather-bound classics. Frederick tried to tell me once that silence in the face of wrong is its own kind of lie. I didn't listen then, but I'm trying to now. Trevor was next, showing up unannounced one rainy afternoon. Unlike his father, he didn't come with apologies but with questions. Did Grandpa really set up that whole elaborate scheme just to expose Mom? He asked, standing uncomfortably in the foyer, unwilling to come further into the house. No, I answered honestly. He did it to protect his legacy and the values he believed in. The exposure was necessary, not the goal. Trevor nodded slowly. The trust fund conditions about education and meaningful work, do you think he really believed I could change? The vulnerability in his question caught me off guard. He wouldn't have included the condition if he didn't believe you had potential, Trevor. Grandpa never gave up on people. A week later, Trevor enrolled in community college courses, his first formal education since dropping out of university 5 years earlier. Melissa took longer to reach out, but eventually sent a text asking if we could meet for coffee. The conversation was strained, but opened a door that had seemed permanently closed. Barbara remained the holdout, refusing all contact with me and limiting her interactions with my parents to formal communications through attorneys regarding the business transition. But even this represented progress, accepting the inevitable rather than fighting it at every turn. As the family landscape slowly shifted, I began to understand what Grandpa had meant in his final letters about truth being painful but necessary for genuine healing. We weren't a happy, reconciled family. Perhaps we never would be, but we were at least dealing with reality rather than the elaborate fiction Barbara had constructed over the years. And in that painful reality, authentic relationships had room to grow, even if they would always bear the scars of our shared history. 6 months after the legal battles finally ended, I stood in what was now officially my studio, the sunroom of the Victorian house, transformed with easels, supply cabinets, and large windows that bathed the space in perfect northern light. After months of creative drought, I had finally begun painting again, starting with a portrait of Grandpa Frederick in his workshop, captured in a moment of concentration as he shaped wood on his lathe. Living in the house had been difficult at first. Every room held memories, every object carried emotional weight. For weeks, I'd slept in the guest room, unable to claim the master bedroom that had been his space for so many decades. Gradually, though, the house began to feel less like a museum and more like a home, my home, where I could honor his memory while creating my own story. One of my first major decisions was to transform part of the ground floor into a proper art studio where I could both create and teach small classes. Grandpa would have approved of the space being used to nurture creativity in others, just as he had nurtured mine. As I settled into this new chapter, I continued discovering more of Frederick's wisdom scattered throughout the house. His extensive library revealed books with carefully underlined passages and margin notes that offered glimpses into his thinking. His workshop journals documented not just furniture designs, but philosophical reflections on craftsmanship and life. Even his gardening shed contained a weathered notebook detailing not only planting schedules, but observations about patience, growth, and the natural cycles of renewal. Perhaps most meaningful was the discovery of his personal journal, tucked behind his collection of woodworking books. The final entries, written during his hospitalization, expressed his pride in watching me grow into the person he had always hoped I would become. Ashley visits daily, one entry read. While others come out of obligation, she comes from love. She doesn't realize how rare that quality is to give without calculation, to love without ledgers. In a world increasingly focused on transactions, she remains a testament to genuine connection. That, more than any furniture I've built or money I've earned, is the legacy I'm proudest to leave behind. Reading his words gave me both comfort and direction. 3 months after moving into the house, I established the Frederick Morgan Foundation for Arts Education, using the funds he had designated for that purpose. The foundation's mission was twofold: to provide scholarships for promising young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, and to bring art education to underserved communities through workshops and supplies. The foundation work brought unexpected healing. Focusing on creating opportunities for others helped me process my own grief and find purpose beyond the family conflict. The first scholarship recipient, a talented 16-year-old whose drawings captured urban life with remarkable sensitivity, reminded me so much of myself at that age that I found myself sharing stories about Grandpa's influence during our mentoring sessions. "He sounds like he really saw you," she commented during one conversation. "That's all anybody wants, right? To be truly seen." Her insight struck me profoundly. Perhaps that was what had been missing for Barbara all along, the feeling of being truly seen and valued for herself rather than for what she could achieve or acquire. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it with more compassion. This growing emotional maturity helped me navigate the complicated process of rebuilding family relationships. Setting boundaries became essential. I learned to be open to reconciliation without allowing toxic patterns to reemerge. When Trevor asked to borrow money despite having barely started his educational program, I gently redirected him to the trust fund's proper channels. When Melissa suggested a fresh start that conveniently ignored her role in past conflicts, I acknowledged her outreach while maintaining that real healing required honesty about what had happened. The most surprising reconciliation came with my parents. For years, they had remained distant from family matters, using their careers as buffers against the dysfunction. Now, tasked with managing the furniture company, they were forced to engage more directly with the family legacy. "I think we've been running from Frederick's shadow for so long that we forgot what he was really trying to build," my father admitted during a Sunday dinner at the house, now a monthly tradition. It wasn't just a business, it was a philosophy about creating things of lasting value, treating people with dignity, and using success to lift others up. My mother nodded. "Working with the employees your grandfather hired has been eye-opening. They don't just build furniture, they carry on traditions and values." I never fully appreciated that before. As for Barbara, the distance remained. She declined all invitations to family gatherings, though Richard occasionally attended alone. The monthly allowance stipulated in the Codicil remained unclaimed for nearly a year before she finally, silently, began accepting the funds. Marcus told me she had recently begun seeing a therapist, not the family counseling Grandpa had specified, but perhaps a start toward the reflection he had hoped for. On the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I organized a small memorial gathering in his workshop. 12 people attended, immediate family, a few longtime employees, Pastor Jim, and Marcus. We shared stories about Frederick, each person holding one of his handcrafted items as they spoke, a tangible connection to the man we were remembering. When my turn came, I held up the pocket watch that had started it all. "Grandpa understood something fundamental about inheritance," I said, looking around at the faces of those who had weathered this difficult year alongside me. "He knew that what we leave behind isn't just stuff, it's values, it's character. It's the imprint we make on others' hearts. The most valuable things he left me weren't this house or money for the foundation, but the lessons he taught through how he lived." I paused, running my thumb over the engraved case. "He showed me that integrity isn't just a nice word, it's making hard choices even when easier paths are available. He taught me that true wealth is measured in relationships, not bank accounts. And most importantly, he demonstrated that it's never too late to stand up for what's right, even if that means standing alone." As we shared a meal afterward in the dining room where so many family gatherings had taken place over the decades, I felt Grandpa's presence not as a ghost, but as a foundation, the solid base upon which I was building my own life, incorporating his wisdom while adding my own experiences. In the months that followed, I found my artistic voice evolving. My paintings began incorporating elements of woodworking, textured backgrounds that mimicked grain patterns, color palettes inspired by different wood species, compositions that emphasized craftsmanship and process. My first major exhibition after Grandpa's death, titled Inherited Wisdom, sold out entirely, with the proceeds going to expand the Foundation's scholarship program. Life settled into new patterns. The Victorian house became a gathering place for artists, students, and friends. The workshop hosted weekend classes where I taught basic woodworking skills alongside creative expression. The gardens were restored and expanded, with a memorial bench placed under Grandpa's favorite maple tree. Not everything was resolved, family wounds that deep rarely heal completely, but I had found peace with the complicated legacy I'd inherited. On difficult days, I would often sit in Grandpa's workshop, running my hands over the tools we had once shared, and remember his words, "The truth has a way of surfacing, like cream rising to the top." He had been right, of course. The truth had surfaced, painful as it was. And in that truth, I had found not just an inheritance of property, but a richer legacy of values, courage, and the capacity to create beauty even from life's most difficult moments. Like Grandpa Frederick, I had learned that what we build with our hands matters, but what we build with our hearts matters infinitely more. What inheritance story has shaped your family? Have you ever discovered an unexpected truth that changed everything? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember that our true legacy isn't what we leave behind, but how we lived while we were here. Thank you for listening to my journey. And may you find wisdom in your own inheritance, whatever form it takes.